and a relentless focus on results that most people in my position couldn't match. For the past year and a half, I'd been dating Derek Paulson. We met at a professional networking event in Boulder, where he was working as a senior consultant at Morrison Tech Solutions. Derek was charming, confident, and knew how to work a room. He had that effortless charisma that made clients feel heard and colleagues feel important. On paper, we were the perfect power couple, both climbing our respective corporate ladders, both ambitious, both driven. But there was something about Derek that had started bothering me over the past few months. Small things at first. The way he'd interrupt me when I was talking about work. How he'd explain concepts to me that I already understood. Sometimes concepts I'd actually taught him. The subtle eye rolls when I'd share a professional victory. He called it playful teasing, but it felt like something else entirely. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe the stress of my recent promotion was making me paranoid. But the incidents kept stacking up, each one a little paper cut to my professional pride. 3 months ago, Hartwell & Associates acquired Morrison Tech Solutions. It was a strategic move. Morrison had valuable clients in the tech sector, and our firm wanted to expand our reach into Silicon Valley. The acquisition was confidential during negotiations, and I was part of the executive team managing the transition. Derek had no idea I was involved. He didn't even know the acquisition was happening until the company-wide announcement. When the news broke, Derek was furious. Not at the acquisition itself, but at the restructuring that came with it. Morrison's leadership would be absorbed into Hartwell's existing hierarchy, and several positions would be reevaluated. In Derek's mind, this was a disaster. He spent weeks complaining about the corporate vultures at Hartwell, who were ruining everything Morrison had built. I sat across from him at dinner, night after night, listening to him trash my company, my colleagues, my work, the leadership team I was literally part of. I never told him about my role in the acquisition. Part of me wanted to see how far he'd go. Another part of me was curious whether he'd ever actually ask me about my perspective instead of just assuming I'd agree with his rants. He never did. The integration process was set to take 6 months. During that time, every Morrison employee would be assessed for fit within Hartwell's structure. Some would transition smoothly into new roles. Others would be let go. A few would be offered opportunities to move into leadership positions if they demonstrated the right skills and attitude. My job was to oversee the entire process for the Western region. I reviewed performance records, conducted interviews, analyzed team dynamics, and made recommendations to the executive board about who should stay, who should be promoted, and who we needed to part ways with. It was the most high-stakes project of my career. Derek had no idea I was running the integration. To him, I was just his girlfriend who worked in operations at some consulting firm. He'd never asked for details about what I actually did. When I tried to explain the scope of my role, his eyes would glaze over, or he'd change the subject to his own work. It was like my career existed in some vague, unimportant background space that didn't warrant his full attention. The Tuesday that changed everything started like any other day. I had a 10 a.m. meeting scheduled with 3 Morrison consultants who were being considered for senior positions at Hartwell. The meeting was at our downtown Denver office, in the large conference room on the 14th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. I arrived early, as I always did. I reviewed my notes on each candidate, cross-referenced their performance reviews, and prepared my questions. The meeting agenda was straightforward: discuss their experience, gauge their understanding of Hartwell's culture, and assess whether they had the leadership qualities we needed for the expanded team structure. At 9:55 a.m., my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Ms. Chen, the Morrison consultants are here. Send them in, please." The door opened, and 3 people walked into the room. 2 of them I'd never met in person, Jennifer Walters and Marcus Rivera, both senior consultants with impressive track records. They smiled professionally, shook my hand, and took seats across from me at the long table. The 3rd person was Derek. He walked in last, eyes on his phone, clearly not paying attention to his surroundings. When he finally looked up and saw me sitting at the head of the table, His expression went through a rapid sequence of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like annoyance. "Mia?" he said, his tone caught between a greeting and a question. "What are you doing here?" I kept my expression neutral and professional. "Good morning, Derek. Please have a seat. We have a lot to cover this morning." He glanced at Jennifer and Marcus, then back at me, clearly trying to process the situation. "I didn't know you'd be in this meeting." "I'm conducting all the integration assessments for the Western region," I said calmly. "Now, if everyone's ready, let's begin." Derek sat down slowly, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He still didn't fully understand what was happening. In his mind, I was probably just sitting in on someone else's meeting, maybe taking notes or handling logistics. The possibility that I was the decision-maker hadn't even registered yet. I started with the standard questions, directing them to the group. "Can each of you tell me about a project where you had to navigate conflicting stakeholder interests and how you resolved it?" Jennifer went first, delivering a thoughtful response about mediating between a client's IT department and their executive team during a major system overhaul. Marcus followed with a story about managing vendor relationships during a budget crisis. Both answers were solid, demonstrating critical thinking and diplomatic skills. Then it was Derek's turn. "Well," he began, leaning back in his chair with a casual confidence that immediately set off alarm bells. "I think the question itself is a bit simplistic. In real consulting work, you're not just resolving conflicts, you're preventing them from happening in the first place through strategic positioning." I made a note on my pad. "Can you give me a specific example?" "Sure, but I want to reframe it first," he said, and I watched as Jennifer and Marcus exchanged quick glances. "The premise of your question assumes reactive problem-solving, which isn't really how high-level consulting works. What you should be asking is how we build frameworks that eliminate stakeholder conflicts before they emerge." He wasn't answering my question. He was mansplaining consulting to me, a regional operations director who'd been in the industry for over a decade. I kept my voice level. "I appreciate the theoretical perspective, Derek, but I'd like to hear about a specific situation you've handled. Real projects with real outcomes." "Right, of course," he said, in a tone that suggested he was humoring me. "There was this situation last year with a healthcare client." As he talked, he kept glancing at Jennifer and Marcus, directing his eye contact toward them instead of me, as if they were his real audience and I was just the administrative assistant recording the meeting. He used phrases like, "You probably wouldn't understand the technical aspects, and this might be too in the weeds for this conversation," whenever he touched on anything. "Complex." Each phrase landed like a small slap. This was my boyfriend, someone who supposedly respected me, treating me like I was intellectually inferior in my own conference room. But we were just getting started. And Derek had no idea how badly he was about to sabotage himself. Derek finished his rambling answer about the healthcare client, and I moved on to the next question. "Let's talk about team leadership. Jennifer, can you describe your approach to managing junior consultants?" Jennifer launched into a thoughtful response about mentorship and creating growth opportunities. Her answer was polished and genuine, exactly what I wanted to hear from someone we were considering for a senior role. Before I could turn to Marcus, Derek cut in. "Yeah, that's a good textbook answer, but in practice, it's more nuanced than that." He shifted in his seat, angling his body toward Jennifer and Marcus. "What Jennifer's describing is fine for small-scale projects, but when you're dealing with enterprise-level clients, you need a completely different framework." Jennifer's smile tightened. She'd just been interrupted and implicitly told her answer wasn't sophisticated enough. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I made another note. "Derek, I'll get your perspective in a moment. Marcus, I'd like to hear from you first." "Actually, if I could just add one thing," Derek started. "In a moment," I said firmly, holding up my hand. The temperature in the room shifted slightly. Marcus cleared his throat and began his answer. Derek sat back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing an expression I'd seen 100 times. the look of someone who thinks they're being silenced despite having the most valuable input. He kept that expression through Marcus's entire response, occasionally shaking his head slightly as if disagreeing with points that were perfectly reasonable. When Marcus finished, I turned to Derek. "Now, what's your leadership philosophy?" "Well, I think we need to be honest about what leadership actually means in consulting," he began. "A lot of people, and I'm not pointing fingers here, confuse management with leadership. Management is about maintaining processes. Leadership is about vision and strategy." He paused, as if waiting for me to be impressed by this distinction that every first-year MBA student learns. "I focus on high-level strategic thinking rather than getting bogged down in operational details," he continued. "That's where real value gets created. The operational stuff, project timelines, resource allocation. That's important, obviously, but it's not where leaders should be spending their mental energy." I felt my jaw tighten. Operational details were literally my specialty. He was essentially saying that what I did for a living wasn't real leadership. "Can you give me an example of a time when you've successfully led a team through a difficult project?" I asked. "Sure, but I want to clarify something first," Derek said, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "When you ask about difficult projects, what specific metrics are you using to define difficulty? Because that term gets thrown around a lot, and I want to make sure we're speaking the same language." Marcus and Jennifer both looked down at the table. The second-hand embarrassment was palpable. "I'm asking about challenges you've faced and overcome," I said, my voice colder now. "That's a fairly standard interview question." Right, Derek said with a slight laugh. "I just wanted to establish parameters. So there was this migration project last fall." As he talked, he started directing his explanations toward the window, as if he were giving a TED Talk rather than answering a question in a professional interview. He used buzzwords liberally: synergistic alignment, paradigm shifts, vertical integration, without actually saying anything substantive. Halfway through his answer, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then actually picked it up and checked the message while still talking. I stopped writing. "Derek, could you put your phone away, please?" "Oh, sorry, He typed something quickly. Had to respond to a client. "You know how it is. They don't care that you're in meetings." He said it with a conspiratorial grin, as if we were all in on the same joke about demanding clients. Except we were in the middle of his interview. The interview that would determine whether he kept his job. "As I was saying about the migration project," he continued, still not putting the phone completely away, just flipping it face down, "the challenge was that nobody on the team really understood the architecture we were dealing with. So I had to basically step in and redesign the entire approach." "What was the outcome?" I asked. We completed it, obviously. "Under budget, actually, which was impressive given how much remedial work I had to do to fix the initial planning mistakes." I glanced at my notes. I'd reviewed the file on that project before the meeting. Derek had been one of 4 senior consultants on the team, not the lead. The project had actually come in 8% over budget and 2 weeks late. His performance review from that quarter specifically mentioned challenges with collaborative decision-making and tendency to work independently rather than leveraging team input. He was lying. Or at minimum, drastically embellishing his role and rewriting the project's results. "Interesting," I said neutrally. "Let's move on. I'd like to ask all 3 of you about how you handle feedback. Specifically, can you tell me about a time when you received critical feedback and how you responded to it?" Marcus went first, describing a situation where a client had concerns about his communication style and how he'd worked with a mentor to adjust his approach. It was humble and self-aware, exactly what good leadership looks like. Jennifer shared a story about a project deliverable that hadn't met client expectations and the concrete steps she'd taken to improve her analytical process. Again, thoughtful and mature. Then Derek's turn came. "Honestly, I don't get a lot of critical feedback," he said with a shrug. "My clients are usually pretty satisfied with my work, but I guess if I had to pick something..." He paused, thinking. There was this one manager a few years ago who said I needed to be more of a team player, which, looking back, was really just her way of saying she wanted me to slow down to the team's pace instead of pushing for excellence. And how did you respond to that feedback? I pressed. I smiled and nodded. And then I kept doing what I was doing because I knew I was right, he said with a laugh. And guess what? 6 months later, that same manager was using me as an example of high performance in team meetings. So sometimes you have to trust your own judgment even when people are giving you feedback that doesn't make sense. I set down my pen and looked directly at him. So your approach to critical feedback is to ignore it if you disagree? Not ignore it, he said, suddenly defensive. Evaluate it critically. Not all feedback is good feedback, Mia. You have to filter out the noise from people who don't really understand what you're trying to accomplish. The room had gone completely silent. Jennifer was staring at her hands. Marcus was doing his best to look engaged, while clearly wishing he were anywhere else. And Derek, still oblivious, kept digging his own professional grave deeper with every word. You know what? He said, turning to Jennifer and Marcus. Let me be real with you both for a second. This acquisition has been rough on everyone. But if you come into Hartwell with the right attitude, confident, not apologetic about the value you bring, you'll do fine. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to prove yourself just because Morrison got absorbed. He shot a quick glance at me, as if I were the one making things difficult. As if this meeting were some kind of hazing ritual instead of a standard professional assessment. I closed my notebook and folded my hands on the table. Thank you all for your time this morning, I said calmly. Jennifer, Marcus, I appreciate your thoughtful responses. You'll hear from HR within the next week about next steps. They both stood immediately, clearly relieved the meeting was over. They shook my hand, thanked me professionally, and headed for the door. Derek lingered, standing more slowly, looking confused about why the meeting had ended so abruptly. Derek, I said quietly, I need you to stay. We have some things to discuss. Jennifer and Marcus exchanged one final glance before closing the conference room door behind them, leaving Derek and me alone. He looked at me with that same slightly annoyed expression, like I was wasting his time with whatever administrative follow-up question I probably had. He still didn't understand, but he was about to. The conference room felt different with just the two of us. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed harsher somehow, illuminating every detail with uncomfortable clarity. Derek stood by his chair, hands in his pockets, waiting for whatever minor administrative question I supposedly needed to ask. His body language was casual, maybe even slightly impatient. So what's up? He asked. I've got another call in 20 minutes. I stayed seated, maintaining my position at the head of the table. You can sit down. This is going to take longer than 20 minutes. He frowned but didn't move. Mia, if this is about something personal, can we do this later? I'm still in work mode right now. This is absolutely about work, I said. Sit down, Derek. Something in my tone finally registered. He pulled out the chair and sat, but his expression had shifted from casual to guarded. I want to make sure you understand what just happened in this meeting, I began. Do you know why you were here this morning? Integration assessment, he said with a slight shrug. Everyone from Morrison has to do them. It's just a formality to make sure we fit into Hartwell's structure. And do you know who conducts these assessments? HR, I assume. Or maybe some middle management team. He paused, looking at me with dawning confusion. Wait, why were you running the meeting? Are you like an assistant to whoever's actually in charge? I felt a cold laugh building in my chest, but I kept it contained. Derek, I am the Regional Operations Director for Hartwell and Associates. I oversee all operations across Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. The integration of Morrison Tech Solutions falls entirely under my authority. He stared at me, processing. You're... what? I am the person who decides whether Morrison employees transition into roles at Hartwell, get promoted, or get let go, I said clearly. That wasn't a formal meeting. That was your actual interview. And I was the only decision-maker in the room. The color drained from his face. You never told me you were... you said you worked in operations, but I thought... You thought what? That operation meant I scheduled meetings and ordered office supplies. My voice was calm, but each word landed with precision. I've tried to tell you about my job dozens of times. You never asked follow-up questions. You never showed interest in the details. You just assumed it wasn't important. That's not fair, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. You never explicitly said you were a director. I did. Multiple times. You weren't listening. I opened my notebook to a fresh page. But let's talk about what happened in this meeting. Do you understand how you came across it? Derek's jaw tightened. I was confident. I showed leadership. Those are qualities Hartwell should want. You interrupted Jennifer twice and dismissed her answers as textbook, I said. You checked your phone in the middle of your own interview. You lied about the migration project outcomes. I have the actual performance data. Derek, the project was over budget and late, and your role was not what you described. That's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of documented fact, I cut him off. But here's what concerns me most. When I asked about handling feedback, you essentially said you ignore criticism that doesn't align with your self-assessment. That's not leadership. That's arrogance. His face flushed red. So what? You're going to penalize me because I have confidence in my abilities? Because I don't just roll over when someone gives me bad feedback? I'm going to assess you based on what you demonstrated in that room, I said. And what you demonstrated was an inability to work collaboratively, a dismissive attitude toward other professionals, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what senior leadership requires. Derek pushed back from the table slightly. This is unbelievable. You're my girlfriend. You're supposed to be on my side. I'm the regional operations director, I repeated. That comes first. And even if it didn't, Derek, you've spent the last 3 months trashing my company, my colleagues, and the leadership team I'm part of. You called us corporate vultures. You said we were ruining everything Morrison built. Did you think that wasn't going to matter? I was venting. I didn't know you were... He stopped, his expression shifting to something uglier. Wait, did you know the acquisition was happening when we talked about it? Yes. So you just sat there and let me talk, knowing the whole time that you were part of it? His voice rose. That's manipulative, Mia. You set me up. I gave you multiple opportunities to ask about my perspective, I said evenly. You never did. You just assumed I'd agree with everything you said. That's not manipulation. That's you not treating me like an equal partner who might have relevant insights. Derek stood abruptly, pacing to the window. So what happens now? You're going to fire me because I didn't worship at the altar of your company. I'm going to make my recommendation to the executive board based on what I observed, I said. Your technical skills are solid. Your client relationships are generally good. But your inability to take feedback, your condescending behavior toward colleagues, and your lack of self-awareness are serious red flags for a senior position. He spun around. You know what this is really about? You're threatened. I've been the successful one in this relationship, and now that you have a little bit of power, you want to tear me down. The accusation was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Derek, I've been a director for over a year. My salary is significantly higher than yours. I manage 43 people across 3 states. But you never knew any of that because you never asked. You just assumed your career was more important. He started, then stopped. His face cycled through several expressions: anger, denial, and finally something that looked like humiliation. How long have you been planning this? Planning what? This ambush. This power play. Did you get some kind of satisfaction from watching me walk into your meeting not knowing? I didn't orchestrate anything, I said tiredly. The integration assessments were scheduled by HR based on position and availability. I had no idea you'd be in this particular session until you walked through that door. If anything, I was hoping we wouldn't end up in this situation. But now that we are, you're loving it, he said bitterly. I stood up, gathering my materials. Actually, Derek, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that when given a chance to show your best professional self, you chose to be condescending and dismissive. I'm disappointed that you treated Jennifer and Marcus like they were beneath you. And I'm disappointed that even now, facing the consequences of your own behavior, you're blaming me instead of looking at what you actually did in that room. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. I need to be clear about something, I said. What happens with your position at Hartwell is a professional decision based on professional criteria. But what happens with us? I paused, making sure he was really hearing me. That's a separate conversation we need to have. Because the person I saw in that meeting isn't someone I recognize. And the person who's standing here right now, accusing me of manipulation instead of taking accountability, isn't someone I want to be with. Derek's expression shifted from anger to something closer to panic. Mia, come on. Don't do this. We can work this out, maybe, I said. But first you need to understand what actually happened here. And I don't think you do yet. I walked toward the door, then turned back. You'll receive communication from HR about your position status within 48 hours. If you want to talk about us, about our relationship, we can do that this evening. But right now, I have 3 more assessment meetings, and I need to be objective for those candidates. You're just going to leave? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. I have a job to do. Derek, just like you should have been focused on doing during your interview. I opened the conference room door and stepped into the hallway, leaving him standing alone by the windows, finally understanding the gravity of what he'd just done to himself. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already drafting my recommendation to the executive board. The rest of that Tuesday blurred into a series of mechanical tasks. 3 more assessment meetings, each one requiring me to be present, objective, and professional while my personal life imploded in the background. I took notes, asked questions, evaluated responses, and somehow managed to keep my focus where it needed to be. But between meetings, in those quiet moments alone in my office, the reality of what had happened settled over me like heavy fog. My phone buzzed constantly. Derek was texting. We need to talk now. This isn't fair. You can't just make a decision about my career when you're emotionally involved. I'm coming to your office. I forwarded the messages to Chloe Martinez, our HR director, with a brief note. A candidate from this morning's 10 a.m. session is attempting to contact me directly regarding assessment outcomes. Please handle according to protocol. Chloe responded within 5 minutes. Noted. I'll reach out to him directly and remind him of proper channels. You okay? I didn't answer that question. By 6 p.m., I was back in my home office. The one Derek had always called Mia's little workspace, as if the strategic decisions I made from that desk were somehow less significant than his work. The same desk where I'd drafted the acquisition proposal that had ultimately absorbed his company. My laptop sat open in front of me, cursor blinking on a blank assessment report. Derek's report. I'd completed the other 3 already. Jennifer Walters was getting a strong recommendation for senior consultant with a pathway to team lead. Marcus Rivera was approved for lateral transition with growth potential. And the 3rd candidate, someone Derek had never met, was being recommended for project management training. Derek's report was different. I needed to be surgical in my language, factual and unassailable. Personal feelings couldn't enter into this document. Even though personal feelings were currently shredding my insides, I started typing. Assessment summary. Derek Paulson, Senior Consultant, Morrison Tech Solutions. Strengths. Demonstrated technical knowledge in systems architecture and client-facing communication. Previous performance reviews indicate successful project completions and positive client feedback in contained scope engagements. Areas of concern. During the integration assessment conducted on November 6th, candidates displayed several behaviors, inconsistent with Hartwell's leadership values and senior-level expectations. My phone rang. Derek. I declined the call. It rang again immediately. Declined. A text appeared. If you don't talk to me right now, I'm driving to your place. I called Chloe. He's threatening to show up at my home. That's harassment, she said flatly. I'm documenting this. Do you want to file a formal complaint? I want this to stay professional, I said. But yes, document everything. Already on it. I've also sent him an email outlining appropriate contact protocols during the assessment period. If he shows up at your residence, call building security first, then me. After we hung up, I returned to the report, including interruption of other candidates, dismissive commentary toward professional peers, misrepresentation of past project outcomes, and stated unwillingness to integrate critical feedback into professional development. Another text from Derek. You're being vindictive. Everyone can see that. I blocked his number and continued writing. The report took 3 hours to complete. Every sentence was backed by specific observations, timestamps from the meeting, and cross-referenced with his performance documentation from Morrison. By the time I finished, it was airtight. No one could accuse me of personal bias because every criticism was observable, documented, and professionally framed. My recommendation sat at the bottom of the page. Not recommended for senior position. Suggest standard consultant role with mandatory leadership development program and 90-day performance review. Alternative, separation package if candidate unwilling to accept modified role. I sent it to my boss, Catherine Reeves, the VP of Operations, with a note. Assessment completed. Please review for approval. Note that I have a personal relationship with this candidate which I'm declaring for transparency. Happy to recuse myself from the final decision if you feel it's appropriate. Catherine responded at 10:47 p.m. Reviewed. Your assessment is thorough and well documented. I see no indication of bias. If anything, you bent over backwards to be fair. The behaviors you described are disqualifying regardless of personal relationships. I'm approving your recommendation as written. HR will handle communication tomorrow. Tomorrow. Derek would know his fate tomorrow. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark office, suddenly exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but the sender name caught my attention. Jennifer Walters. Ms. Chen, I hope it's appropriate to reach out directly. I wanted to thank you for the professional manner in which you conducted this morning's assessment. I also wanted to say something that might be overstepping, but my conscience won't let me stay silent. I've worked with Derek Paulson for 2 years at Morrison. What you saw this morning wasn't an anomaly or a bad day. That's who he is in professional settings, particularly when women are in positions of authority. I've watched him talk over female project managers, dismiss input from women on his team, and consistently attribute his own mistakes to others while claiming credit for collaborative work. I almost didn't say anything because I don't want to seem like I'm sabotaging a colleague. But after seeing how he treated you, someone clearly far more senior and qualified, I felt you should know this is a pattern, not an isolated incident. Whatever decision you make about his role at Hartwell, please know it's not just about one bad interview. It's about a consistent behavioral issue that multiple people have experienced. Respectfully, Jennifer Walters. I read the email 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Catherine and Chloe with a simple note. Additional context on this morning's candidate. Please add to the file. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture I'd been trying not to see for months. The condescension, the interruptions, the assumption that his career mattered more than mine. It wasn't just relationship issues. It was who Derek fundamentally was, and I'd been making excuses for him because I wanted to believe otherwise. My doorbell rang at 11:30 p.m. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Derek stood outside, looking disheveled, clearly agitated. He rang again, then started knocking. Mia, I know you're in there. We need to talk. You can't just shut me out. I called building security. There's someone at my door who I've asked not to contact me. Can you please remove him from the property? On our way, Mrs. Chen. Through the camera, I watched Derek continue knocking, then saw 2 security guards approach. There was a brief conversation, Derek gesturing emphatically toward my door. The guards remained firm. After several minutes of discussion, Derek finally left, the guards escorting him to ensure he actually departed the premises. Another email from Chloe, timestamped 11:43 p.m. Security contacted me per protocol. I've documented the incident. This establishes a pattern of inappropriate contact. I'm recommending we accelerate the final decision timeline and communicate results first thing tomorrow morning to prevent further escalation. I replied simply, agreed. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying the entire relationship in my head, seeing all the moments I'd dismissed or rationalized. Every time he'd cut me off mid-sentence. Every time he'd explain my own industry back to me. Every time he'd treated my professional accomplishments as cute little achievements, rather than the result of genuine skill and hard work. I'd loved someone who didn't respect me. Maybe he'd thought he did, but respect isn't something you feel. It's something you demonstrate. And Derek had failed that test repeatedly. By dawn, I felt hollowed out but strangely clear. I showered, dressed in my most professional suit, the navy one I saved for difficult meetings, and drove to the office through empty streets. Catherine was already there when I arrived at 7 a.m. She waved me into her office. HR is contacting Derek at 9, she said without preamble. Given last night's incident and Jennifer Walters' email, we're offering him 2 options. Accept a demotion to junior consultant with mandatory professional development, or take a separation package. Either way, he's not staying in his current role. I nodded. That's more generous than he probably deserves. It's what's legally prudent, Catherine said. But Mia, I want you to know, your assessment was flawless. You did everything right. The situation is messy because of your personal connection, but professionally, you handled it exactly as you should have. Thank you, I managed. Take the day off if you need it. I'd rather be here, I said. Sitting at home will just make it worse. At 9:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Derek had gotten a new phone or borrowed someone else's. They just called me. You did this. You ruined my career because I bruised your ego. I hope you're happy. I forwarded it to Chloe without responding. At 9:47 a.m., another message. I'm taking the separation package. I can't work for a company that would do this. Tell yourself whatever you need to, but we both know this is personal. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to explain one more time that he'd done this to himself. But there was no point. Derek had chosen his narrative, and nothing I said would change it. Instead, I texted back just 4 words. I wish you well. Then I blocked the new number and returned to work. The first week after Derek accepted the separation package was strange. I kept expecting to see his name pop up on my phone, or to run into him at one of the coffee shops we used to frequent. Denver suddenly felt both too big and too small at the same time. Work became my anchor. The Morrison integration was progressing smoothly. Jennifer Walters transitioned into her senior consultant role and immediately proved why I'd recommended her. Within 2 weeks, she'd identified inefficiencies in 3 client accounts and proposed solutions that saved us nearly $40,000. Marcus Rivera was thriving in his new team, bringing fresh perspectives that our longtime Hartwell consultants genuinely appreciated. The integration that Derek had called a disaster was actually turning into one of our most successful acquisitions. Catherine pulled me aside during a leadership meeting 3 weeks after the incident. The board reviewed the Morrison integration metrics. We're ahead of schedule and under budget. They specifically noted your management of the personnel transitions as exemplary. Just doing my job, I said. No, she corrected. You did it exceptionally, especially given the circumstances. That's the difference. I found Derek's LinkedIn profile one evening, against my better judgment. He'd updated it quickly. Exploring new opportunities in technology consulting. Open to senior leadership roles. His summary talked about navigating corporate politics and maintaining integrity in challenging environments. The reframing was almost impressive in its delusion. He'd turned being fired for unprofessional behavior into a story about standing up for his principles. I closed the browser and didn't look again. My friends had questions, of course. Sarah, Chen, no relation, just unfortunate coincidence, met me for drinks 4 weeks after everything imploded. So he really had no idea you were basically his boss, she asked, signaling the bartender for another round. None whatsoever, I confirmed. And honestly, Sarah, that's what hurts the most. Not that he behaved badly in the meeting. That was just him showing his true colors. It's that he spent a year and a half with me and never once actually asked what I did. Not in any meaningful way. Because he assumed it wasn't important, Sarah said quietly. Exactly. I swirled the wine in my glass. I kept telling myself he was just focused on his own career, that it wasn't personal. But it was personal. His indifference to my professional life was a statement about how he saw me. You deserve someone who's actually interested in your whole life, Sarah said. Not just the parts that make him look good at dinner parties. That conversation stayed with me. Derek had liked dating someone who worked in corporate America because it made him look good to have a professional girlfriend. But he'd never actually valued what I did or who I was beyond that surface level. 6 weeks after the separation, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You were right." I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. Mia, this is Derek. I'm using a friend's email because I know you blocked me everywhere else. I'm not writing to argue or to ask you to change anything. I just need you to know something. I've been job hunting for over a month. Every interview I've done has been humbling in ways I didn't expect. One company asked me about a time I received critical feedback. Same question you asked. I gave them basically the same answer I gave you, about trusting my own judgment. The interviewer stopped me and said, "So you don't take feedback seriously?" It was the shortest interview I've ever had. Another place asked for references. 3 of my former Morrison colleagues declined. Jennifer Walters actually told me she couldn't in good conscience recommend me because of how I treated team members. I had no idea she felt that way. I've had a lot of time to think. Too much time, honestly. And I keep coming back to that morning in your conference room. I was so focused on impressing the other candidates and proving I belonged at Hartwell that I didn't even see you. Not really. I saw someone I needed to perform in front of, not someone I should have been respecting as a professional. You told me that day that I wasn't someone you recognized. I didn't understand what you meant at the time. But I do now. I wasn't being my best self. I was someone who needed everyone to think he was the smartest person in the room, even when he clearly wasn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for you to reconsider anything. I know that ship has sailed, professionally and personally. I just wanted you to know that you were right about me. About all of it. And I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to finally hear it. I hope you're doing well. I hope Hartwell appreciates what they have in you. Because I clearly never did. Derek, I read it twice. Then saved it to a folder and closed my email. It was the accountability I'd wanted from him during our relationship. But it came too late, and I'd already moved past needing it. 3 months after the incident, Hartwell promoted me to Senior Regional Operations Director, expanding my territory to include Arizona and New Mexico. It meant more responsibility, a significant raise, and recognition that my work spoke for itself. Jennifer Walters sent me a congratulations message. Well deserved. You're the kind of leader people actually want to work for. That meant more than the promotion itself. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. But I noticed something different about how I approached it. I asked more questions up front. I paid attention to whether men listened when I talked about work, or if their eyes glazed over. I watched for signs of the subtle condescension I'd tolerated with Derek. The mansplaining, the interrupting, the assumption that their careers were inherently more important. I have higher standards now. Not because I was bitter, but because I finally understood what I deserved. One evening, 5 months after everything happened, I was working late in my office when Catherine knocked on my door. "Got a minute?" she asked. Always. She sat down across from my desk. "I wanted to tell you something. When you first declared your relationship with Derek in that email, I was concerned. Not about bias, I trusted you. but I worried about how it would affect you personally. Going through something like that. It wasn't easy, I admitted. But you handled it with more professionalism than most people could manage, Catherine continued. You documented everything, stayed objective, and made the right call even when it cost you personally. That's real leadership, Mia. Not the performative nonsense Derek was doing in that meeting. The real thing. After she left, I sat in my office looking out at the Denver skyline, lights twinkling as the city settled into evening. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting across from Derek at dinner, listening to him trash my company while staying silent about my role in it. That version of me had been afraid of conflict, afraid of threatening his ego, afraid of being seen as difficult. This version of me had ended his career without hesitation because it was the right professional decision. I didn't regret it. Not the decision, not the confrontation, not the aftermath. Derek had walked into that conference room thinking he was untouchable, that his confidence would carry him through anything. He'd learned a hard lesson about the difference between actual competence and performed superiority, and I'd learned something too. That silence in the face of disrespect isn't kindness or patience. It's just teaching people that disrespect is acceptable. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Team leadership dinner tomorrow, 6 p.m. I was taking my team out to celebrate closing the Morrison integration ahead of schedule. Jennifer, Marcus, and 15 others who'd worked tirelessly to make the acquisition successful. People who respected each other, collaborated effectively, and understood that real leadership meant elevating others, not constantly proving you were the smartest person in the room. I shut down my computer, grabbed my coat, and headed home. The story of what happened with Derek occasionally came up in professional circles. Denver's corporate world is smaller than people think. But the narrative that circulated wasn't about a vindictive girlfriend ruining her boyfriend's career. It was about a professional who'd made a difficult call based on observable behavior and documented concerns, because that's exactly what had happened. And as I drove home through the city I'd built my career in, I realized I was genuinely happy. Not in spite of what happened with Derek, but in some ways because of it. That confrontation had forced me to recognize patterns I'd been ignoring, to set standards I should have established years ago, and to finally understand that being respected isn't something you ask for, it's something you require. The woman Derek had condescended to in that conference room had walked away from the relationship with clarity about who she was and what she deserved. The regional operations director who'd ended his career had done exactly what her job required, and both of those women were me, finally aligned and finally whole. I didn't need Derek to understand that. I didn't need his apology or his regret, or his belated recognition of my worth. I already knew exactly who I was, and that was enough. 7 months after the Derek situation, I thought I'd moved past it completely. My expanded territory was thriving. My team respected me, and I'd even started dating someone new, a civil engineer named Lucas Bradford, who actually asked thoughtful questions about my work and remembered the details when I answered. Then I got the email that changed everything. It came from Richard Donnelly, the CEO of Pinnacle Consulting Group, one of the largest firms in the Southwest region. The subject line read, "Partnership Opportunity, Confidential. Ms. Chen, your work on the Morrison-Hartwell integration has not gone unnoticed in our industry. I'd like to discuss a potential collaboration between Pinnacle and Hartwell that would require someone with your specific expertise in organizational transitions. Would you be available for a preliminary conversation next week? Best regards, Richard Donnelly." Pinnacle was massive, over 1,500 employees across 12 states. A partnership with them could transform Hartwell's market position entirely. I forwarded the email to Catherine with a note. "Worth exploring?" Her response was immediate. "Absolutely. Set up the call. This could be huge." The preliminary call turned into an in-person meeting at Pinnacle's Phoenix headquarters. Richard Donnelly was in his early 60s, sharp-eyed and direct. He'd brought his COO, Patricia Hayes, and their head of strategic partnerships, someone whose name I didn't catch initially, because I was too focused on not letting my jaw drop. It was Derek. He sat at the conference table in an expensive suit, looking healthier than the last time I'd seen him, more polished, more composed. When our eyes met, I saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something that looked like genuine discomfort. Richard noticed the moment. "I take it you two know each other?" "We've met," I said carefully, keeping my voice professional. Derek cleared his throat. "We worked in the same industry circles." "Hello, Mia." "Derek." I set my briefcase down and took my seat, mind racing through implications. Derek was Pinnacle's head of strategic partnerships? That seemed impossible given how spectacularly he'd failed at Morrison, but here he was, apparently thriving. The meeting proceeded with forced normalcy. Richard outlined Pinnacle's vision for the partnership. Hartwell would handle the operational integration for their smaller acquisitions, while Pinnacle provided capital and market access. It was a smart play that could benefit both companies significantly. Derek remained mostly quiet during the presentation, letting Richard and Patricia handle the talking. But I could feel his presence like static electricity in the room. After 90 minutes, Richard stood. "Ms. Chen, I think we have a foundation for something substantial here. Patricia, can you walk Mia through the preliminary contract terms? Derek and I have that board call in 5 minutes. It was a transparent excuse to leave us alone. I wasn't sure if Richard knew our history, or if this was just unfortunate timing, but suddenly it was just Derek and me in the conference room. He waited until the door closed. "I need you to know, I had no idea you'd be the point person for Hartwell on this. Does it matter?" I asked, pulling out my tablet to review documents. "Yes, actually. It matters a lot." He moved to the chair next to mine, maintaining a respectful distance. "Mia, I know my email months ago probably seemed like too little too late. But I meant every word. I've spent the last 7 months rebuilding my career and, honestly, rebuilding myself." I looked at him directly. "How did you end up at Pinnacle? Last I heard, you were struggling to get interviews." "I was," he admitted. "For about 2 months, it was brutal. Then I ran into Patricia Hayes at an industry conference. We'd worked together years ago at a different firm. She saw I was floundering and asked what happened. I told her the truth, all of it, including how I'd behaved and why I deserved to be fired." "You told her you deserved it?" I raised an eyebrow. "I did. Because I finally understood that I did." Derek leaned back in his chair. Patricia appreciated the honesty. She said most people in my position would blame circumstances, or other people. She offered me a junior role at Pinnacle with the explicit understanding that I was on probation and needed to prove I'd actually changed. "And apparently you did," I said, gesturing around the executive conference room. "I worked harder than I've ever worked," he said. "Not just on projects, but on listening. Actually listening. Taking feedback seriously. Elevating my team instead of trying to be the star." Patricia promoted me twice in 6 months because I finally learned how to be the kind of leader I always thought I was. I studied his face, looking for signs of the performative confidence I remembered. Instead, I saw something different. A quieter certainty, less flash and more substance. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, "Because if Hartwell and Pinnacle move forward with this partnership, we'll be working together extensively," Derek said. "And I need you to know that I'm not the same person who walked into your conference room last year. I also need you to know that if my presence makes this collaboration untenable for you, I'll remove myself from the project. Your comfort and the success of this partnership are both more important than my ego." That last sentence would have been unimaginable from the old Derek. The old Derek would have fought to stay on the project, and would have seen removing himself as a weakness. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But Derek, understand this, if we work together, it will be purely professional. Whatever history we have stays in the past." "Absolutely," he agreed immediately. "I'm not trying to resurrect anything personal, Mia. I'm trying to be someone you can trust as a professional colleague." "That's all," Patricia returned before I could respond, carrying a thick folder of preliminary contracts. Derek excused himself, leaving Patricia and me to discuss terms. On the flight back to Denver, I stared out the window at the desert landscape below, trying to process what had happened. Derek had changed. That seemed genuine. But did that change our history? Did it make what happened at Hartwell any less significant? More importantly, could I work with him without it affecting my judgment or professional effectiveness? Catherine met me at the office the next morning, eager for details. I told her everything, including the Derek complication. She listened carefully, then asked the question I'd been dreading. Can you be objective about this partnership with him involved? I think so, I said slowly, but I'm not certain. Then we need to establish clear boundaries, Catherine said decisively. If this partnership moves forward, I want regular check-ins with you about any concerns. At the first sign that the personal history is affecting professional decisions, from either side, we address it immediately. And Mia, if you need to step back from this, that's completely legitimate. I don't want to step back, I realized as I said it. This partnership could be transformative for Hartwell. I can't let my history with Derek prevent us from pursuing it. Then we move forward carefully, Catherine said, but with eyes wide open. The partnership negotiations took 3 weeks. Derek and I communicated primarily through email and conference calls, maintaining strict professionalism. He was different in these interactions, precise, thoughtful, actually listening when others spoke rather than waiting for his turn to talk. During one video call, a junior analyst from Pinnacle presented market data that contradicted Derek's earlier assumptions. I watched his reaction carefully. The old Derek would have dismissed it or found a way to reframe the data to support his original point. Instead, he paused, considered, then said, "You're right. I was working from outdated metrics. Thank you for catching that. Can you send me your sources so I can update my analysis?" It was such a small moment, but it spoke volumes. Jennifer Walters noticed the tension during one of our internal planning meetings. After everyone else left, she lingered by my office door. "I heard Derek Paulson is at Pinnacle," she said carefully, "and that he's involved in this partnership." "He is," I confirmed. "How are you handling that?" I appreciated her directness. "Professionally. He seems different, but I'm cautious." Jennifer nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I ran into Marcus Rivera last week. He mentioned that several former Morrison people have heard about Derek's transformation. Apparently, he's been reaching out to people he worked with badly before, apologizing and trying to make amends. Did Marcus believe it was genuine? I asked. He said Derek seemed sincere, Jennifer replied. But Marcus also said that even if Derek has changed, it doesn't erase what he did. Growth is good, but accountability is about accepting that some bridges stay burned. That wisdom stayed with me as the partnership finalized. Hartwell and Pinnacle signed the agreement at the end of the month, launching a collaboration that analysts immediately recognized as strategically brilliant. Derek sent me a brief email after the signing. Thank you for not letting our history prevent this partnership. Hartwell and Pinnacle will both benefit from your willingness to separate the past from the present. Looking forward to working together professionally. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I printed the email and added it to a folder I'd been keeping, documentation of this new chapter, whatever it turned out to be. Lucas noticed I was distracted that evening over dinner. Everything okay? I told him about Derek, about the partnership, about the strange experience of watching someone fundamentally change after they'd destroyed everything. Do you believe he's actually different? Lucas asked. I think he's learned some hard lessons, I said carefully. Whether that translates to permanent change or just better performance, time will tell. And how do you feel about working with him? That was the question I'd been avoiding. I took a moment to really consider it. Honestly, part of me wants him to fail, to prove I was right about him, I admitted. But a bigger part of me hopes he has changed, because that means people can actually grow from their mistakes. That means there's hope for everyone who screws up. Lucas reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're a better person than I am. I just want him to fail. I laughed, but his words echoed later. Was I being naive? Was I setting myself up for disappointment by believing Derek's transformation might be real? Only time would tell. and the clock had just started ticking. The Hartwell-Pinnacle partnership officially launched in month 8. I was assigned as the lead integration specialist, coordinating between our two companies on 3 major client acquisitions. Derek was my primary point of contact at Pinnacle. Our first joint project meeting happened in a neutral location, a conference facility in Albuquerque, halfway between Denver and Phoenix. Both teams arrived with their best people, ready to prove this partnership was worth the investment. Derek arrived 10 minutes early, just as I was setting up the presentation materials. He held 2 coffee cups. Black, no sugar, right? He offered one to me. I hesitated, then took it. You remembered. I remember a lot of things I should have paid attention to the first time around, he said simply, then took a seat away from the head of the table, leaving the leadership position open for me. The old Derek would have tried to co-lead the meeting or position himself as equally important. This Derek understood hierarchy and respected it. The meeting went smoothly. We presented our integration timeline, fielded questions from both teams, and established clear accountability structures. Derek contributed meaningfully but never overshadowed others. When a junior analyst from Hartwell made a suggestion that contradicted his approach, he nodded thoughtfully. That's actually a smarter framework than what I proposed, he said. Let's use that instead. After the meeting, both teams mingled over lunch. I watched Derek interact with my people, noticing how he asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He complimented Jennifer Walters on a report she'd written, giving specific details that proved he'd actually read it. Jennifer caught my eye across the room and gave me a subtle nod. She saw it too. This wasn't a performance. This was consistent, sustained behavioral change, but the real test came 6 weeks later. We were finalizing the integration of Pinnacle's latest acquisition, a mid-sized firm in Austin called Bridgepoint Solutions. The project was complicated, involving significant personnel restructuring and client relationship transfers. Both companies had billions riding on getting it right. During a critical planning call, Derek and I disagreed fundamentally about the timeline. He wanted to accelerate the integration, complete it in 4 months instead of 6. I thought that was reckless and would damage client relationships. Derek, rushing this puts 23 client accounts at risk, I said firmly on the video call. Our team's watching. We need the full 6 months to ensure smooth transitions. I understand your concern, Derek replied, but I've analyzed the data, and I think we can mitigate those risks with additional transition support staff. Additional staff means additional costs that weren't in the budget, I countered. This was the moment, the test of whether Derek had truly changed or whether he'd revert to his old patterns under pressure. The old Derek would have bulldozed forward, dismissing my concerns or going over my head to Catherine. Derek was quiet for a moment, then said, You're right. Can we table this discussion and meet separately to review the risk analysis in detail? I might be missing factors you're seeing. Not, let's agree to disagree. Not, I'll escalate this to the executives. Just a genuine acknowledgement that he might be wrong and a willingness to consider my perspective. We met the next day via video call, just the 2 of us. Derek had prepared a detailed spreadsheet showing his accelerated timeline with risk mitigation strategies. I studied it carefully. This is thorough, I admitted. But look at these 3 clients. I highlighted them. They're all in highly regulated industries. They need more hand-holding during transitions, not less. Your timeline doesn't account for their specific needs. Derek leaned closer to his screen, examining the highlighted accounts. I watched his expression shift as he processed what I was showing him. You're absolutely right, he said slowly. I was looking at aggregate data and missed the individual nuances. If we accelerate those 3 accounts, we'll lose them. So we stick with the 6-month timeline? I asked. For those 3, yes. But what if we split the difference? Full timeline for high-touch clients, accelerated for the others? Would that work? I considered it. That might actually be the best approach. Let me model it out and get back to you. Sounds good. He paused. Then added, Thank you for catching that. Mia. I would have cost both our companies significant revenue if you hadn't pushed back. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, processing what had just happened. Derek had listened, reconsidered, compromised, and given credit where it was due. Every single behavior that had been absent during that disastrous interview 13 months ago. The modified timeline I proposed was approved by both executive teams. The integration proceeded flawlessly, retaining all 23 client accounts and actually gaining 4 new ones through positive referrals. Patricia Hayes called me personally to thank me. Richard and I chose correctly when we pushed for this partnership. Your strategic thinking saved us from a costly mistake. Derek was open to the feedback, I said, giving credit where it was due. That's what made the difference. Derek's growth has been remarkable, Patricia said. But between you and me, I think losing you was the catalyst he needed. Sometimes people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. After the call ended, I thought about her words. Derek had lost everything, his job, his relationship, his reputation, and had used that rock bottom as a foundation to rebuild himself into something better. That evening, Lucas and I were cooking dinner together when he asked, "How's the Pinnacle project going?" "Successfully," I said, chopping vegetables. "Derek and I actually work well together now. That's good, right?" Lucas glanced at me. "You seem uncertain." "I'm not uncertain about the work," I clarified. "I'm uncertain about what it means." He's genuinely changed, Lucas. And part of me wonders if I was too harsh back then, if I could have handled it differently. Lucas put down his spatula and turned to face me fully. "Mia, you made a professional decision based on observable behavior. He earned that consequence. The fact that he learned from it and became better doesn't mean you did anything wrong. But maybe if I'd given him a chance to improve..." "You did." Lucas interrupted gently. "Every time you tried to talk about your career and he dismissed you, that was a chance. Every time he interrupted or condescended, that was a chance. He had 1.5 years of chances. He just didn't take them seriously until there were real consequences." His words settled something in me. Derek's transformation was admirable, but it didn't retroactively change the fact that he'd needed to lose everything to motivate that change. 2 months later, the Hartwell-Pinnacle partnership was featured in a major industry publication as a model for successful corporate collaboration. The article included interviews with both leadership teams. Derek's quote stood out. "Success in this industry isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about building teams where everyone's intelligence contributes to better outcomes. I learned that lesson the hard way, but it's made me a significantly better leader." The journalist had included context about Derek's previous departure from Morrison Hartwell, framing his current success as a comeback story. But notably, Derek hadn't blamed anyone else or made excuses. He'd simply acknowledged he'd made mistakes and grown from them. I received a text from him after the article was published. "Hope the piece didn't make you uncomfortable." I asked them not to include details about Morrison, but they insisted on context. "If it causes any issues, I can request a retraction of that section." I replied, "It's fine. Your honesty was actually refreshing. Congratulations on the recognition. It's well-deserved." A year after the partnership began, Hartwell promoted me to Vice President of Strategic Operations. The role came with a seat on the executive board and oversight of all major partnerships and integrations across the company. At my celebration dinner, Catherine raised her glass. "To Mia Chen, who taught us all that real leadership means making difficult decisions with integrity, even when those decisions cost you personally." Jennifer Walters added, "And who showed us that you can be both strong and fair, both decisive and compassionate." Later, checking my phone, I found an email from Derek. The subject line read, "Congratulations. Mia, I saw the announcement about your promotion. It's richly deserved and long overdue. You're going to excel in that role because you already embody everything it requires. I wanted to say thank you, not just for giving me a chance to prove I'd change through this partnership, but for being the catalyst that forced me to change in the first place. That morning in your conference room was the worst professional moment of my life, but it was also the most important. You held me accountable when no one else did. You refused to accept the version of myself I'd been performing. And by doing so, you gave me the opportunity to become someone better. I know we'll never be what we were, and I'm not asking for that. But I hope we can continue being what we are now, professional colleagues who respect each other and produce excellent work together. Congratulations again on everything you've achieved. You've earned every bit of it. Derek. I read it twice, then closed my laptop and returned to my celebration. Derek had changed, truly and fundamentally. But that change didn't erase what happened or validate his original behavior. It simply proved that accountability, when delivered with clarity and conviction, could be transformative. I'd lost a relationship, but I'd gained something more valuable. The absolute certainty of my own worth and the understanding that demanding respect wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. The woman who'd sat silently at dinner, while her boyfriend trashed her company, no longer existed. In her place stood a vice president who'd built her career on competence, led with integrity, and refused to compromise her standards for anyone's comfort, including her own. And that woman, I realized as I looked around the room at the team I'd built and the career I'd earned, was exactly who I was always meant to be. Some people walk into your life to stay. Others walk in to teach you what you won't tolerate. Derek had been the second kind. And the lesson was worth every difficult